Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Giuditta. Good attempt at the last name, not the easiest. I'm from Advantage Unified Commerce. We're a commerce marketing company. So think about your shopper marketing, your e-commerce marketing, your digital shelf is where we really play the most. And Andrew, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone. So Andrew Ice. Actually going to start with a full-on intro since I think it's an easy way to go. But I've been in marketing for about 15 years. Before that, I was in business school at Michigan. I feel like I want to mention Michigan right now. It's just we're having a moment, and you got to lean into these special moments in life. But I started for 6 years at Reckitt Benckiser. Then I went over to alcohol for most of the last 9 years. Anheuser-Busch, Pernod Ricard, and Beam Suntory. I actually finished up my time at Beam Suntory just a few weeks ago, so I think that might reflect a role from just a few short weeks ago. I haven't announced yet where I'm going, but please follow me on LinkedIn so that way you could see and hopefully like wherever I'm next. I actually don't 100% know yet, but when I do, you'll be the first to know.
So, Andrew, what do you do when you're not working for fun?
Yeah, great question. Well, the moment that I went from Reckitt Benckiser to Anheuser-Busch was a big career moment. Reckitt, for those who know the brands like Lysol and Airwick, really great general management sort of company. But Anheuser was this really great opportunity for me, product innovation, creativity at a level that I'd never done before. And so when I went into that opportunity, I actually got really like kind of obsessed with comedy, and I started to do improv. I thought that would be a really fun way to learn a new set of skills, bring out my creativity, really become sort of a bolder sort of presenter in those type of meetings. And it's very fortunate I did that 9 short years ago, because that's allowed Katie and I today to improvise this entire conversation. We just learned the topic about 15 minutes ago.
Yep.
We wiped the sweat off our foreheads, and we're ready to go. And I think, so credit to Katie for rolling with the punches on this one.
Thanks, Andrew. And Lysol is very funny.
Lysol, we had our moments, but nothing beats the humor from a good beer brand.
That's right. So let's get into it. How do you think about defining consumer segmentation in the alcohol space versus cleaning?
Yeah. Major differences. I feel like alcohol was really leading the way, has always, in sort of understanding that, I think for many, many years, it was very much demographic discussions. We talked about age a lot as like a leading important factor. And in fact, when you start to really unpack what's important, especially in alcohol, thinking about age is fairly misleading and not all that helpful. And when we started to look at brands like Bud Light back in the day, it was always, the youngest consumers will call it LDA, legal drinking age, to 25. We recognize beyond the honesty that there's going to be below that, but ultimately that's the range. That doesn't actually make sense. Young at heart was a much more provocative and sort of relevant statement than simply talking about young consumers based on age, because that mindset for consumers for many people doesn't change, and we all know that person that they're adult, they're adulting, they'll have wife, kids, and 6 days a week or maybe 29 days a month are pretty buttoned up. But when they have that day where it's like game day or what have you, they get after it. They get after it in a way where you're like, you are just like Frank the Tank when you were like 21. You're just now Frank, the senior executive at Samsung. Like, it hasn't changed that much in those moments, and so that's critical. I think the second piece that I would overlay there is that demand spaces is really how you think about it. And so it goes beyond talking about the consumer profile to the demand space, which gives you room to sort of think about things in a way that are much more dynamic. I like this, like some alcohol demand spaces would be bond and connect, or celebrate, where you're celebrating rewards and appreciate the finer things. All of us here probably can say, well, I have moments in my life, month, where those are moments that are relevant to me. Yes, you are not one consumer. You are not that one consumer that we try to get the entire share of requirements in the way that Lysol was like, we're going to get you, and then when we got you, we're going to make sure you never go to Clorox again. It's not like that, right? Now we understand that I'm only going to be able to satisfy certain needs with any one given brand. I do a portfolio of brands underneath me, which gives me room to sort of play in a bit more broader sense. But I think that's the power of sort of that type of thinking.
That makes total sense. So, how do you use that demand, I think you called it, for alcohol to kind of drive your product innovation? Because a lot of consumers are telling you what they want. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, the power of the demand space and having a portfolio and at a macro level for a company to have many different segments you can play in, and even in one sort of tequila, you can play in, every single brand should play in a defined demand space, that there's a clear sort of guardrails. It does allow you to think about innovation in very particular ways. When you think about something like a trend that's very popular in Mexico, Cristalino. For those who know tequila, in Mexico, it's very popular to filtrate or just distill an extra time and take out all of the color, and it creates what is perceived there as a more refined experience for the tequila. If you go to most accounts, you go to and you see 20-somethings, they've got bottle service with the Cristalino. Like, that's what they have. It's the powerful sort of thing. Well, we wanted to bring it to the U.S. Because we felt like that trend could be resonant. We wanted to find the right demand space, right? And even though you might go liberally with that in Mexico, we wanted to be very choiceful to find the right demand space. And when you look at Appreciate the Finer Things and what El Tesoro represents, it's a brand that has 3 generations of Camarenas who really are devout in sort of the traditional way of making tequila. Taking the color out is kind of a no-no. I asked Carlos Camarena about that, and his answer was so like, I did it provocatively, like, what are your thoughts on the trend? And it was like a 3-minute like conversation around why the purity of tequila is powerful. You take all that time to age it, and then you take out the color. It's sacrilegious. And yet, if you look at a brand that's playing in more of a cultural cool space, that plays in a celebrate demand space, that's going to over-index in on-premise accounts that are similar to the ones I described in Mexico, it starts to make sense on why Cristalino makes sense in terms of finding the right product with the right demand space and the right consumer.
So, how offended was your friend in Mexico when he saw tequila soda ready to drinks?
It would be bold to go up to someone like that. But at the same point, he has a famous quote, the only way that this particular part, Carlos said, the only wrong way to drink tequila is alone, which I think is a beautiful statement around, I think, drinking in general, where drink because it's fun, because it brings people together, even if it's on Zoom, even if it's, in ways that are, from what we know in COVID, a little different. It's just so much more fun, and I think it's the power of the drink. So I would say, on the one hand, I wouldn't ask him. On the other hand, he did say that there's no wrong way to drink.
Okay, he's the boss.
And he actually, such a cool thing, in order to teach, spirits, there's some very traditional ways to sort of do that. And he had añejo is a very aged form, 1 year plus of tequila. And his añejo and pancakes as a way to talk about sort of the flavor notes, the chocolate comes through and things of that nature. It's really, really cool and a great education tool. So you can be, with that kind of thing, very, very intriguing, and I think very, sort of opt in with the education if you understand kind of the magic of what makes tequila tequila.
I love that. So, sort of switching gears to social listening, how do you listen in the social channels to what your consumers are telling you they're doing with the product? So, for example, the idea of like tequila old fashioned versus a traditional old fashioned, some of what we're doing at our company is taking that information, the ratings and reviews, and looking at how do you apply that to your product detail pages in a way that maybe you haven't before. Maybe it's not the standard copy out of your brand book, but what do you do with that?
One of the terms one of the coolest things about being at a company that's got obviously a Japanese heritage is you do learn some key words and phrases that are incredibly powerful. The idea that like everything's kind of like up in the air and like it's not as a literal articulation, I think requires you to really be an active listener and learner, which I think I loved for those 2 years. And the word that of gemba is one that we talk about a lot. It's a Japanese word. kind of literally-ish means like where the action is, and it's the opportunity to sort of understand behaviors by getting out there and asking questions and learning. Traditionally, the major areas have been sort of like talking to accounts on and off premise, going to bars, just talking to bartenders, which is such a fun way to spend your time, order a drink and have a half-hour conversation. The other way is to go to the distillery, and that's also super fun, of asking all your unique kind of nerdy science questions and having them kind of geek out on the process and how fermentation matters in distillation. The newest way I think of Gemba, maybe it's not official, but as far as I'm concerned, is this idea of social and how the amount of data that Gemba is so powerful. Because, and as much as it's fantastic to go to bars, the number of data points you can get is rather limited. And so I think that the evolution of social has so dramatically changed the way that Gemba works, in at least my understanding and my feeling around it. And so first thing I'd say is, Japanese culture is amazing. Learning new languages is so cool, but taking that and sort of like bringing that lens into your own life and meaning is powerful. I didn't answer the question though.
Right.
The question is around social listening, and I think from that sense, we sort of love to look and scour and see consumers' feedback. It is, I would say, more than any other category, you get like free feedback and interesting points of views on how consumers love or hate your product, are intrigued in trying new things and what they have tried and want everyone to know about and share about. Everyone who has a cool cocktail loves to say, that looks delicious, I like my Jameson this way. And you get so many interesting things that you can learn from that way. So for me, a lot of the things that I hear about first are from consumer sort of perspective. For me, I learned about a tequila old fashioned long before it became popular as a drink. Same thing with an espresso martini. Like, you learned about the way that people were sort of drinking and consuming, which I think is one of the cool parts about it. One of the funniest ones was, I believe it was on Jameson, and someone talked about Snapple, and I tried it and it was delicious. It was Jameson, Snapple, fresh lemon if you had it. I used lemon juice because I was on a pinch and that's all I had, and then a little bit of honey. It was so good. So like, you never know where ideas come from, and that's been a drink that I bring out every once in a while when there's a Snapple in the house, and everyone's always wowed how you could turn, sort of something as simple as a Snapple into a really delicious cocktail.
I love that. And kind of taking the social piece to the next level. Obviously, in liquor, there's a lot of requirements and regulations, but what do you do when you can activate on Instagram, but you really just have to watch on TikTok?
Yeah, well, it's been the longest, and when's it going to happen? But TikTok is supposed to hit a threshold of age. Age gating occurs on all social platforms to make sure that there's enough people that are of age, so that way you're not marketing, obviously, to the wrong person, which would be 21 and under. So TikTok is an area that you can't put your sponsored posts or have an organic channel. You can, however, listen and engage, and you can, however, take TikTok influencers and bring them to the Instagram platform, where there's obviously going to be some level of overlap. So there's opportunities to sort of dabble in TikTok, but you really are going to spend most of your time in Instagram and other channels that are sort of permitted to do as such. And certainly, the beautiful images of Instagram have certainly helped. Versus, obviously, Twitter has its great purposes. Not as interesting to sort of think about like the visual aesthetic of like recipe builds and things of that nature. Obviously, Instagram's going to play a much bigger role there, and so understanding the platform, what you can and can't do, has allowed us to, I think, participate in the best way we can within the permissible guidelines.
I love that. And I think, all the different social channels have different types of influencers, just like we have different types of shoppers in different channels. So how do you think about engaging shoppers when they have different needs, right? Going back to your demand point earlier, when someone's shopping in what used to be Drizzly, RIP, Uber Eats, versus like someone who's walking into Total Wine and More every Thursday night at 7:00, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, certainly, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you certainly start off with the same process of building a full funnel campaign, and understanding that bottom of the funnel has to sort of meet multiple channel needs is, I think, the first mandatory. all big creative ideas, I think, at its core should and must sort of do that. But you certainly want to have that sense check early on in the creative process to make sure that you're not going in a place that feels too niche towards one particular channel. But I do think that you have to be very sophisticated. We all know the Super Bowl, for those who were here earlier, you have to communicate as the big game. And the big game coming up, I mean, most people, I think, would agree that the majority of your Uber Eats and Drizzly, which is no longer a very sort of shocking news when you think about the amount of time you think about Drizzly as the property. But when you think about what you want to do there, it's going to be game day's about to start, right? Or in the day or two leading up to, right? That's the sort of the obvious place, and the demand is going to be all the ingredients you need, sort of convenience right away. I think the other channels have obviously the obvious purchase benefit through clicking through, but I think in as so much as you can do that in the month leading up and really think about it as another way to drive that brand awareness, to sort of get into people's mindsets and consideration, because when they go into a store and they see a huge display, just because there's a huge display doesn't mean you get people to stop and sort of select. You really want to be creating those impressions and that sort of imprint on them, so that way they go over to that sort of display and pick up the product. I actually think most people might see that ad, see the click through to Total Wine, and not necessarily do their research until they get into store and say, oh yeah, now I did want to think about that earlier, I didn't have the mindset. They go and they quickly scan, they say, oh, okay, great, this is on a tequila matchmaker, it scores really well, or just quickly scan some influencers and I see that there's some level of vetted. I mean, the bottom line is that for this category, over than 50%, probably 70% of decisions are made before you're in store. So you need to be winning that mindset, whether you are trying to win on Drizzly or on Total Wine. You've got to be winning the at-home sort of conversation and mind share, but that extra bit of in-store is really helpful to amplify that message.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you also kind of customizing creative in those different channels because people are in a different mindset at those different points?
I think so. I mean, or I would say yes. Certainly what we know is when you get down to conversion, you for sure are getting very tight to a very clear message. And it's hard because sometimes there's this really great brand campaign, but it really comes down to, for Drizzly, the simplicity of what are they looking for? A triple distilled smooth tequila, perfect for game day. That's going to work for you. That's going to be a hardworking message. But if that's the only message that they've seen, I don't think that's going to be compelling. All of the brand work to prime them on the awesome programming that we've been doing on a brand like Tres Generaciones with this program Familia Tres, and this way we worked with influencers and created a content strategy and a PR and had 6 months of runway on the campaign. All of that work is what you're doing to sort of pay off for that simple moment of like, what is something that I can bring that I have a level of pride, right? That's what alcohol is about. You need to have something you could say on why you bought it. And that can be, for, credit to Diageo, like George Clooney's tequila doesn't even work there anymore. He sold it. That's still a pliable, statement of that's a good reason to buy it, right? That still works. And you utilize the things that work for your brand. Brands like mine that don't have a huge celebrity push and are sort of specifically going to build brands in a different way, super challenging, right? In an environment where celebrities are the thing, having to find a way to speak about a product that feels distinctive and engaging, really hard. And that, I think we have to work twice as hard to sort of deliver on that sort of foundational idea.
Right, and then there's the consumer who just wants to know what the deal is, which ready-to-drink is on sale, which one are they going to buy because of that, right?
And in the beer game, that was always super challenging. I mean, I'd always say, this is 9 years ago, so things have changed in the last year because of the what occurred in the last sort of 6-7 months. But I would call it Bud Miller Coors Light, like that. I would go into the bar if I was in college and I would say, "What do you got on deal?" Like that. I mean, you're not ashamed to say that because you recognize that they're all going to probably get us a good time. We're all going to be doing the things that we were going to do, and regardless, at that stage, I found it to be super challenging. Now, I was in finance then, and maybe that was my finance brain going for more efficiency of that versus a marketer. And now I'm like, what do you mean you're not thinking about the brand first? But I mean, we just want to have good times with our friends. And so that's the lift that I think we all struggle with. Is how do you create that this at a $4 price point is definitively the choice I would make over that. And that's a tough thing to do at that price point.
That makes total sense. I think we have a couple minutes left. Anything else you wanted to cover, trends or anything that really feels close to the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, show of hands here, how many folks here drink tequila? Show of hands
Good
here,
choice.
how many of those same people, or drop your hands if you did not drink tequila sort of 10 years ago. So raise your hand if you drank it 10 years ago. Yeah, that's about 8 versus about 35, right? Which is such a cool example of how categories can dynamically change, right? Tequila has been around for hundreds of years, right? Cuervo and Sauza are one of our sort of parent brands that are over 200 years old. It's really cool to think about reinvention and really cool to think about how a category can completely change in a period of time because, yes, some things were a little bit luck, but a lot of it was a better process, better ways to communicate it, better brands, leaning into health associations, leaning into the celebrity sort of associations, and that obviously dovetails into influencer and all the things that matter from a social ecosystem. So it's just like the coolest category to think about in terms of how you can go from stagnant, kind of uncool, Cuervo, no, people would always say Cuervo, hangovers, college, I haven't drank that in years, to it's the only thing I drink. They have the highest quality products, and I swear by it from night and day. So super interesting example of marketing and the power of what we can do, whether it's innovation leads or brand leads, to completely change the stars of a category.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions because we have a couple minutes.
Building on the tequila example you just gave, how do you distinguish true growth from just trend? Like, is it just, because I just think about like every 10 years I'm drinking something different because there's something new. So yeah, how do you then answer the powers that be, like, this is just a trend and the growth isn't sustainable, or is it?
The tequila's growth was that early on. I think that was an issue, and I would say that some companies, I would say, were a little slower to the game than others because they kept saying, is this really that critical? Like, we're a whiskey company, let's keep selling whiskeys, and maybe they didn't realize that tequila would actually become bigger than bourbon. It actually is the biggest now. So it's undeniable now because it's the biggest, but yeah, for years, there was a lot of that conversation on whether it'll boom and bust. There was moments when people said, oh, gin could be big in the States. Gin will never be like a top 3 spirit in the U.S. It had a blip, and it's not like it's not delicious and refreshing to do a lot. But a lot of it is looking at the data, and I think if you look at it now, so now it's super undeniable. Like, if you look at where it's sourcing from, tequila is sourcing from vodka, especially on that kind of like Blanco unaged, right? It's clear. The vodka soda became the tequila soda and lime, which became the tequila soda and lime in a can. It is everywhere. But you look at more age, and actually it's sourcing, yes, into bourbons, but actually from bourbons, but actually cognac is I don't want to say it's a dying category, but it is so down. It is down double digits, in some places even much more, because a lot of the same consumers said tequila is more interesting, it's a little more versatile, it's a little cooler and trendier. Like, yeah, cognac had the cool celebrities and was in like cool rap songs 20, 30 years ago, but now like Casamigos is in the cool hip hop songs. It's making culture. It's not just attaching to culture, but disrupting and building. And so there is a certain point when it's like obvious, as I think marketers and business leaders, you need to get ahead of that, because by the time you wait, it's super expensive. And now you see brands like Casamigos who are doing MLB partnerships, which is just like national. You cannot fight that wave now of like it's everywhere. And like, how do you take a small brand and start to build? The pace with which you could do that is almost hard to sort of justify when you see the behemoths doing what they're doing.
All right. Well, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it, everyone.